to our dad on the Jim Cressman podcast.
Well, generally on this podcast, I have guests on here that I've known for years, but every once in a while, I stumble upon a compelling, interesting human being that I am just down for having a conversation with. And today we have Duane Gibson on the podcast. Now, for those of you who maybe are unfamiliar, and I'll confess I was before I started delving into what he's done and accomplished, and it's pretty incredible. He has a Guinness Book of World Records setting accomplishment in the world of freestyle rap. I believe you rapped for over 8 hours straight. Is that correct?
That's right. 8 hours and 45 minutes.
8 hours and almost 9 hours. That is wild. You've spoken at over 2,500 schools, encompassing topics like anti-bullying, Black history, the importance of literacy, which are all foundational. You've had songs that have hit the #1 slot on the U.S. college radio charts. You've received some freestyle lyrics from Snoop Dogg and brushed up against some of the luminaries in that world. Like, it's pretty crazy what you've accomplished, man. You're a very driven guy. And of course, you got a book that you released in 2012 called Stay Driven. So really happy to have you on, and just wanted to give a little bit of an intro there. So thanks for being patient through it.
Well, that was quite the intro. I appreciate it. Sometimes you forget what you've done, but that's the cool thing about having a career is looking back and seeing like, oh, wow, I've been doing it for a while.
I think that's so important. I often encourage artists that I work with to focus on what they want, but focus a little less on where they think they should be versus how far they've come.
Yeah.
Right? Like, when you do that, then you can be fueled by this idea of gratitude, right?
Correct.
Well, you know what? I'm not where I want to be, but holy shit, I am way further ahead than I was when I started this journey.
1,000%.
Yeah, it's just so good to reconnect with that. So when you're off and speaking with these schools and you are talking to these kids, what are some of the most foundational lessons that you're trying to get across to them? Like, what are you really trying to dispense in terms of wisdom, knowledge, and assistance for them?
I just, you can talk about anti-bullying, and when it comes to bullying, it comes in many different shapes and forms. I mean, I assume when you were growing up, it might be the same as me. We didn't talk about bullying in schools. Kids were picked on and you had to deal with it. And so it doesn't matter if it's bullying or just getting picked on, or your parents are getting divorced, or you're just going through a tough time, or you've got a big dream in your mind and you're like, how can I accomplish this? It sounds crazy. Nobody believes in me. And I like to be the person that goes into the school and say, I've been there. And to look kids in the eye and for them to look back at me and like, really? And I'm like, yeah, I've been there. And it's not going to be easy, but you can get through it too.
Yeah. And basically what you're doing is you're a walking, talking version of what you testify to, right? It's like this idea that, hey, listen, I'm not just here to talk about why bullying is bad. I'm here to tell you that there's a good chance you're going to be bullied in some way, shape, or form in your life. Precisely. But it isn't going to necessarily stop you from achieving what you want to achieve.
I think it's important for youth to hear that message too, because the world is a tough place. And I look at the challenges that I went through, aside from bullying, as strengthening me. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think too that that is such an empowering mindset, to take what's happened to you and turn it into fuel to actually help you achieve what you want to achieve in your life, rather than sort of identify with the sadness and the frustration and the pain and the victimization, which might be righteous. It might be righteous. I'm not saying that some forms of victimization and identifying with that doesn't have some level of utility, but at some point you got to leave it behind and move ahead with your life. Right?
Yeah,
you just have to.
Yeah. And that's taking responsibility and being self-aware with it as well.
Right. So let's talk about the music. I read some of your essays, which, by the way, you're extremely articulate.
Thank you.
Particularly, I was really taken by the essay, "The Death of Socially Conscious Hip Hop." and your outspoken criticism of modern aspects of hip hop, rock, and their fusion with pop music. So let's delve into a little bit of that. What do you think the modern movement is missing in terms of depth that some of the earlier hip hop pioneers had?
Yeah, it's funny because I wrote that over 20 years ago now too. So I'm looking at through a different lens and a different scope. And now being in the music business, I have a different type of appreciation for it. But what I loved as a kid was hearing pure hip hop that wasn't fueled by trying to make something for the masses. I grew up on music like Gangstar, who would have a song called Mass Appeal. You know, you think you want to be big and have a song with mass appeal. And they were basically saying the opposite. I listened to EPMD and said, don't go for the crossover. Don't change who you are to fit in.
Don't chase the market.
Don't chase the market. And I love that I grew up on that, because I think that's what helped me build a career, as opposed to so many artists that are that one-hit wonder, that, you know, and hey, there's nothing wrong with being a one-hit wonder in a sense. To have a big song, that's, you know, a lot of artists' dreams. But then you have the pressure to follow it up and again, and that's got to be really tough. So I think what I learned from hip hop and the hip hop that I loved was that if you stay true to who you are, your core fan base is always going to appreciate you, and you can have that long career. Whereas if you chase the latest sound and the latest gimmick and try to appeal and not be who you are, that you won't be around. In the words of KRS-One, you'll be out of here.
Right. Now, we hear the word authenticity thrown around as it pertains to art all the time, and we often see that authenticity can be bastardized by chasing the market or the temptation of success, right? Breakthrough mainstream success. How do you reconnect with your authenticity as an artist? And what about that process do you think could be of utility to other people who are fighting with that same struggle of, hey, I want to be real, I want to be me, but gosh, I've been in this business for 10 years and I don't know who I am anymore. You know, like, I'm sure that happens.
Oh, definitely. I like keeping around my old rap magazines. I loved magazines when I was growing up. I bought them all. And that feeling of walking to the store, the corner store, and when that new magazine came out and I picked it up and I'd see, oh, they're coming out with a new album, they're doing this. And so when I look at my old magazines, it takes me back there. And for my new album, I started with a song that I wrote in my perspective of 20 years ago. This is what I thought. And so it was cool to do that, to go back and think 20 years ago when I came out with my first album, what mindset was I in? And so I think it's important to keep going back to that old mindset, but at the same time, you don't want to be stuck in the past. So you want to bring it to the forefront. As much as I like to reminisce, I don't want to just reminisce all the time, but I think going back and connecting with that core and what made you like it, and listening to the old music that inspired you, I think it just really connects with you and it keeps you going.
Right. So part of your process of grounding into your authenticity and who you really are is reconnecting with the very items that inspired you to take up music in the first place. I think that's really important, right? I think that a lot of artists can benefit from, okay, why the hell am I here? Why did I start this journey? And how far have I deviated in order to chase the market or people please or appease people who are supposed gatekeepers or even the marketplace? How far have I deviated from what I really am? And then getting back to that, because that's where the truth is. And you alluded to this earlier. There's something, I believe, in the market, some sort of collective wisdom, maybe, that people are they're searching for truth. Yes, they want a great bass line. Yes, they want to party sometimes, right? But there could be truth in that too, right? So sometimes music is just a drug of choice to like elevate your state. But people want to attach to your specific version of, say, heartbreak or some sort of emotion that makes them feel and empathize with what you feel, because that is one of the things that makes us all human.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like what you're saying earlier there too. It's, sometimes people get the wrong idea of me, like they'll attach the label socially conscious and think that I'm serious all the time or stuff like that. I mean, I smile, so then they don't think I'm just serious all the time. But when I'm talking to kids too, I say, I grew up around two different groups of people, and some group of people that I'd hang out with, they'd make fun of me for wanting to study hard. They'd say, oh, Duane thinks he's going to be a rapper. What phase is that? And then I hung out with a different group of people that when I'd say, oh, I have to study, they'd say, oh, cool, no problem. Or they'd say things like, hey, man, go study because you're going to be someone. Go be a rapper. Of course, you're going to make us all proud. But I also say to kids, we weren't just studying all the time. We had a good time as well. But it is important to surround yourself with people that are supportive and that can be serious with you, but that can have fun.
And I think that all ties back to social justice. I think that if humanity collectively was focused on encouraging the best in all that exists as us as individuals, we would see a lot of the problems that eat away at the fabric of society, whether it's racism, sexism, all the isms, right, that are bad. We would see those just dissipate because there's a part of us that gravitates to certain circles based on what we think we're worthy of, right? So we get what we tolerate. And if we don't think we're worthy of greatness, then we're okay hanging around with a bunch of bozos. Yeah. And if we think or we see in ourselves that we have, bozos who put us down and mitigate us and hold us back. But if we see in ourselves the potentiality of something great, right? And we encourage others in their greatness, well, then all ships can potentially rise with that tide.
Yeah. And for me, like I said, it was hanging out with people that inspired me, pushed me harder. And it's great. My friend Maestro Fresh West has a saying, steel sharpens steel. And he's not the originator of it, but I love how it is. I mean, there's even a line in the Bible that's very similar to it. But I feel very fortunate to have a mentor like Maestro Fresh West, because when I see him, it just drives me and makes me want to aspire and pushes me harder. And I think it's just so important to have those mentors in your life and role models to be able to look up to.
And the advantage that kids have these days too is they can tap into the virtual mentor world. There's so much content available from so many great inspirational figures that if you find something that speaks to you, you can consume hours and hours of content. I didn't have that when I was a kid.
Right. Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's technologically it's somewhat of an advantage, and it also can help broaden your view of the world and your purview of the world because you're exposed to different understandings, interpretations of what other people have gone through. Now let's talk a little bit about the hip hop community in Canada and the rap community in Canada, because we just don't have the infrastructure that the US has had, because really that's the format that was born there. And in some ways, it's similar to country music. Country music was born in the U.S., and although we have country in Canada, we don't have the population, the infrastructure, or the market that they have. So in rap and hip-hop, it must be similar, where there's just not the baseline level of support that you have if you break in Atlanta versus breaking in Ottawa.
Yeah, there's, for so long it felt there was virtually no support. I come from an era where, it just didn't feel like that there was an apathy, and that apathy led to the community just kind of, in Toronto, they call it the crabs in the bucket, the screwface capital, and that just pushed everyone apart. And so I learned at a very early part that when I was sending out my demo tape or asking, can you be my manager? I want to get a manager. And then I realized very quickly, there are no managers. And when I said to myself, I want to get signed to a label, I want to do it here, there are no labels that are going to sign me. And
why weren't they investing in Canadian hip hop at the time?
Well, I'll tell you why. because they were worried that a black artist wouldn't work across the country. And that comes from a major label guy's mouth who told me one time the reason why they didn't sign us, because he saw us perform in Cannes, France at Midem, and he's a music industry veteran, and he started one of the first hip hop labels here independently. Then he became a CEO at a major label here, and became A&R at a major label here, and brought it to the bosses, and they just didn't think it would work with a black artist. And that's why if you look at the artists in hip hop and in R&B that have had success in this country, they've been white. And there's very few exceptions to that. I mean, and the exceptions are, people could say, oh, but look at Drake or look at Weeknd, and their success came from the United States.
Yeah, they broke internationally before they really got noticed up here.
And I think that's one of the core problems is even club promoters do not want to have not historically booked hip hop, and they do not historically book black performers. And I'm glad that that's kind of been aired out over the last few years, that all these things have come to light. But I think that was a big part of the struggle, that there was a lot of racism, that there is a lot of racism. And I saw it not just from the artist perspective, but when I started going to music conferences and in the industry, and I would see that I was the darkest person in the room. And I'm not very dark. I'm mixed, so I'm not that dark. But I just realized there's not a lot of black people even in the industry. And for some people across Canada, maybe they haven't grown up with a lot of black people, and they just have not connected to that culture. And for me, being born in Saskatchewan, having family in Alberta and BC, and growing up in Sault Ste. Marie, I've grown up in different and diverse communities my whole life. So I realized it could work, but it was tough to get somebody to take a chance on a lot of artists.
That is so interesting that this business sometimes is mitigated by the very people who are in the business of propagating artists, right? Like, yeah. I mean, that opinion from that label executive frankly feels like horseshit to me, because I promote concerts all over Western Canada. Yeah. We've done very successful shows with Ice Cube, Snoop Dogg. I mean, there is a hunger for artists of a certain level. I think part of it is you can't get to that level if you can't get signed, and you can't generate any interest or investment. So it's a real chicken and egg, but it's like there's a demand for the universal themes that exist in the music propagated by black culture. Mm-hmm. And those themes are, resonate with kids of all colors, and people of all colors and audiences of all colors. And I think sometimes the gatekeepers forget that. It's like, it doesn't matter what the wrapping paper is. Mm-hmm. What's the message? Yeah.
And I would also say, just to clarify, it's like, there are so many people, though, in the industry that did want me to succeed, or did want rappers and black artists to succeed. They sometimes just didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to reach out. They didn't know where the community is. And that's why I was so glad to be kind of a connector. Like, when I remember last summer, or 2 summers ago now because of COVID, I was putting together a dinner at my music conference, and this manager who comes from the Jane and Finch area, which is already a stigmatized area, but he came down, and I was surprised that my friend brought him, but I was like, let's give him a try, And he was connecting with this other business guy from here in Canada, and neither of them had known each other. But all of a sudden, the fusion when they started speaking. And I remember, like, when one of them went to the washroom, the manager from Jane and Finch was like, yo, D.O., man, like, thanks a lot, man. Like, this guy's real cool. Like, we got a lot in common. And then when he went over to get a drink or something, the other guy was like, yo, D.O., man, I'm so glad you brought him, man. Like, he's really cool. Like, we really hit it off. And it just goes to show that sometimes you got to just bring people together. And that, you know, the great thing about Canada is we are such just a welcoming people. We are such great people. But sometimes we hold back from each other. And I think we have to get together and we have to come together, because I love going out to events and seeing people of all different shades and colors and religions and men and women and theys. And so I think we got to get back to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's at the heart of the idea of community. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, dropping our preconceived individual agendas or egos and finding a way to connect with people, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so grateful to talk to you today. I feel like, you know, we didn't know each other, but
Yeah,
we can
exactly.
have this conversation. We can do it in a public forum, and we can talk about some stuff that's a little uncomfortable to talk about, but still navigate our way through it. So you talked a little bit about the scene in Canada, the
Mhm.
infrastructure in Canada that just isn't there for rap and hip hop. But you were able to find a way because you were able to tie your music to messages of inspiration that are, you know, critical for especially the audience that you're speaking to in schools. And so when did that light bulb turn on for you, where you're like, hey, I could do this a different way. I could create fans by speaking to some of the themes that I'm covering in my music. You know, I listen to your song Stand Up, the anti-bullying song, but also get a chance to speak to students and articulate your vision for how you were able to surmount your pain and your frustration and have that translate into something that might be of utility to them. When did that light bulb come on? You're like, hey, listen, I can do this in a different way. I don't have to break on the radio. There's other ways for me to create fans.
It does take that light bulb moment. So I appreciate how you said that, because, you know, my first school show was in St. Mary's, Ontario, small town, and connecting with all those kids, but seeing like, wow, this works. Like, they're really into this. Like, they're getting along great. They're inviting me back another time. And my second show was at a high school in Scarborough at a technical institute, where, you know, you'd think it was a tougher background, but like, they really liked it. And a teacher was like, you should come out to this school. And so I start going to these schools, but I'm like, but that's not my goal. I want to be performing at a club. I want my songs on the radio, all the conventional notions. So I took a trip down to New York City, and through a matter of happenstance and coincidence, I didn't have a meeting set up at MTV radio till the day before, but I go to this radio interview at MTV, and the guy says afterwards, who interviewed me, you got to really meet my son. So he calls his son, and next thing you know, I'm over at Def Jam Records because his son is an A&R at Def Jam. So now I'm at Def Jam, and I have a great meeting, but my follow-up meeting is where I talk a little bit, because they're like, so Dio, tell me, like, what's going on? Like, how's the shows going? And I was telling them about like performing in clubs, but then I kind of like, and I also do this school thing. And they were like, what? I also do like shows in schools. And the first thing they said was, and you get paid for it? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, so you're in front of like hundreds of kids every day? I'm like, yeah, but like, you know, I want to get back to, and they're like, man, can you imagine the fan base? These kids are going to know you. They're going to know your story, and they're going to know your music, and they're going to follow you. And man, you're going to have fans for life. And then as I'm driving back from New York, back to Toronto, all that sudden, that light bulb went off, because I'd gone to New York thinking, I want the record deal. I want to be signed to Def Jam. And now I'm driving back saying, now I have the plan for my career. Right. Instead of 15 minutes, I'm going to do 15 years. And that's really when I realized that, because sometimes that you get a stigma, or I felt I might have a stigma of the motivational speaker. But then I realized, no, the principal calls me the motivational speaker. The kids call me the rapper.
Right. Yeah. And it's cool that you were able to have that light bulb moment and connect with what would end up perpetuating your art and creating a fan base with these students, and also changing their lives. So I think it's you're affecting them with your story, you're affecting them with your art, which I think creates an even stronger bond. But what a lot of people don't realize, and you could probably speak to this too, is that when you sign with a Def Jam, when you sign with one of these major labels, you give up a lot. What you've been able to do is steward your career as you see fit, retain control, retain autonomy. There's something to be said for that.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that. And I appreciate that. I'm just going back and thinking about the artists that were around at the time. And when I was looking at the posters in there and seeing that those artists didn't have careers, that they might have had that one big hit, that label system got behind them. But I think what a lot of those major label artists had happen was they kind of just wanted to be the artist. And I always just wanted to be the artist. I just wanted to rap. I didn't want to be the manager. I didn't want to be the label. And I remember a lot of my friends were like that too. And they were waiting for someone to come along because they felt that that major label would do everything for us so that they could just focus on the music. But by doing the business, that's how I learned. And it just made it invaluable as far as how I wanted to market myself. So when you start off and when you're at a label, you think you want someone to tell you what to do. And as you learn the business, you realize, no, you want to tell them what to do. You want to make sure your story is being amplified. You want to control the narrative, and you want to control what single you want to come out with. You want to do you want to know which producers you want to work with. Who you want to co-write songs with, who you want to feature.
You have to have the vision. You have to have the vision, and you have to sell that vision to the people who are essentially, a lot of artists look at labels like it's like, okay, great, I got a label deal, now it's smooth sailing. It's like, no. Now you're managing all these service providers. As the artist, you are the CEO and president of your own company, and you are managing the service providers. And if you don't have a vision, well, it's not going to take long for that thing to either get hijacked by somebody else's vision, or it's going to slide off the rails because everyone's working in a bunch of different directions and nobody's pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. And, some artists could look at a budget and say, that's a lot of money. They'll just take care of it. But now when I look at a budget, I'm like, we're going to allocate this there. We're going to do this there. Why would you spend that money there? No, we're going to pull this over here. That doesn't work anymore. We got to do it like this. And I think you only get that. One major way to get that is by controlling it yourself. And that's why I got to give it up for Canada and the grant system, because it really empowered me to be an artist entrepreneur. And so thank you to Factor. Thank you to Ontario Creates. But I really mean that because I like how they just allowed me as an artist to control my destiny and for me to learn on that fly with that process.
Yeah, it's imperative. I mean, I tell American friends about the infrastructure we have up here in terms of grants and bursaries and available monies and funding through the government, and their minds are just blown. They had no idea that you can tap into this great resource that supports the arts up here so ardently. And it's so important. It's so foundational. And have you noticed that there's been a bit more of a shift of investment, maybe not so much from the private sector, but the public sector into hip hop and rap to try and build that community a bit more? Like, has that been the trend in the last few years?
Definitely. And I was so proud to see it, that those industry gatekeepers started to say, okay, what do we got to do? we have to start doing things. We have to start allocating more money. We have to start getting the young entrepreneurs into the game. We have to teach them the ropes. And the other big part of it is we have to showcase, because a lot of hip hop, well, there was virtually no hip hop artists doing these showcases at major music conferences around the world. And I applied to play in, it was Hong Kong first. And when I got accepted to play in Hong Kong at a music conference, that was amazing. And I had gone to Taiwan before that because I had a friend there. And so I set up another concert and a few more in Taiwan. But when they saw, okay, Dio, he's pretty good, he's in Hong Kong here and he's doing a lot of the business. So what do we got to do? And I said, we got to go down to Atlanta. And so we started going down to Atlanta and making connections and making moves. And just before I got on here, man, it was a really proud moment because there's an artist, Devin Tracy. And I known this guy since he was a kid. I didn't know him personally, but he started as a dancer, just an amazing 13, 14-year-old kid dancer. And then he started rapping, and we got him onto a showcase that CIMA produced, the Canadian Independent Music Association, out in Rotterdam, Netherlands. And his manager at the last moment couldn't come. So he said, D, I got Devin Tracy coming. I know you've got a full room, but do you mind taking him in? And this kid has got to be 20 at the time. I said, okay. But I said, he's going to have to sleep on the floor. And some, rappers that have this big idea of fame and success might have been like, yo, man, I got to, they got to take care of me when I'm out there. But you know what he did? He slept, he just said, D, do you mind if I take this spot on the floor? And he slept on the floor and he performed incredibly, hung out with everyone, very personable. And just before I got on here, I'm looking at Instagram and he's doing a conversation, him and Young Thug, who's one of the biggest rappers in the game. And I'm just like, wow, so proud of you, man, because that was over 10 years ago. And now he's starting to have success in a major way. And I love that he stuck with it and stuck to it. But a part of me wishes that this infrastructure was set up more so that he could have had that success even younger. But I love
also that forced humility he had to develop is part and parcel to a winning attitude, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's those people who actually usually end up being much more grateful once they achieve some level of success. It's kind of the dirty secret, and not only about the hip hop industry, but the music industry in general, is it's all about the flaws, right? Mm-hmm. Publicly. Yeah. But a lot of artists are struggling financially or, mental health issues. And, but people on the outside, they don't see any of that on the veneer and the superficialities. They're only exposed to the best of the world that exists, even if that's a fake world. Yep. And that can attract people who are turned on by that idea into the format, into the business. And then they get in there and they realize, no, it is blood, sweat, and tears. It is grinding. It is traveling when you're already exhausted. It is, finding a way to force yourself out of being an introvert to an extrovert so that you can go out and meet fans and feel good about yourself. There's so much more to this that gets lost when people are attracted to the business because they watch a few music videos and they go, oh, I want a life like that. It's like, no. You might get there one day, but that's not how it starts. Everything you're saying is just ringing so true. And that's why it just makes me think of the power of mentors. And that's why I was proud that in that moment, I could be a mentor to Devin Tracy. But, going on the road with Classified and going on the road with Sweatshop Union and through all these small towns that I'm sure through, whether it's Grand Prairie or Lethbridge, Vernon, but those being in those towns and in those markets and sleeping on the ground sometimes, I've done it.
but that's what showed me, hey, these guys are doing it. And each time they're moving up a little bit more. So you know what? I'm going to do it. And then from opening up for them, I was able to go and do our own tour. And I think that's that rock and roll mentality. But I loved how somebody showed that to me. But it really does sometimes take somebody taking you under their wing and showing you the ropes.
Well, you know it. I mean, it's a huge investment to take somebody out on the road with you, because you don't want them to make you look bad.
Yeah.
And you don't want them to, forget why they're there. Mm-hmm. And, some people have the right attitude in that realm. So when you went out on the road with Classified, for example, and you were in the opening position and he was the headliner, what were the things that you did day to day that allowed him to fulfill his role to the best and allowed you to make the most of your opportunity that you were experiencing at that time out on the road with him?
Well, I was a student of Wendy Day, a big hip hop personality in the United States, and she's worked with a lot of artists. But one of the artists in particular is Tupac. And she had a great friendship with Tupac. And I remember reading an article that she wrote in the early 2000s about why she feels that Tupac was able to build a successful career. And, that facade of Tupac's gangster wasn't who he really was in a lot of ways. But she said what he would do is he would often be the opener at the show. And after he'd perform, he'd go around back, he'd come through the front door, and he'd just hang out with people. And he would make a connection with people. And so when I went on the road with Classified, I would go on first as the opener. I would come off stage. I would mingle with people, and I'd go to the merch booth. But if they weren't coming to the merch booth, I always had some CDs on me. So when they said, hey, man, that was a great performance. Like, I'd love to get your CD. And like, it's over there. It's at the booth. I actually got it right here. Because if you have it right with you, then there's no excuse. And then, so I would hustle those CDs, but I would also make sure to have etiquette so that when I'm performing, I'm bigging up Classified. Like, you guys here to see Classified tonight? Yeah, give it up. And, you always show love to all the artists on the bill. And I always treated the promoter with respect, because I saw that Classified did that, but I also realized, like, I want to get that future booking. So, hey, man, just want to thank you for having me here. This is a great time. Like, you put on good shows. Like, I might be coming on the road, like, and making that connection. Those are the keys. We're making connections with fans, selling the merch, and connecting with the promoter. And again, just treating everybody with respect.
Oh, man, that is maybe a great message to wrap this up on.
Yeah.
Just given the fact that so many of the people who listen to this podcast are artists themselves. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are developing artists or emerging artists. So they're in a position where, they're maybe going to head out on the road with somebody. And that advice you just dispensed is amazing. You've got to make the most of your role, but you also have to know your role, right? And you have to make the promoter and the headlining artist and the audience all feel like you value them and appreciate them. And if you can do that, you've really got it figured out. Well, thanks for doing this, man.
Oh, it's been great. It's been a pleasure. I was checking your stuff out before, and you've got a nice catalog yourself as well. So much respect to what you're doing. And if I could just add something to the end with what I'm saying there too is I'm going out to Europe next week. I'm going to be doing shows in London, England, and then Amsterdam. And I put out on Facebook last night, I said, I'm looking for 2 artists that might want to join me. Serious inquirers only. And I put my email address. And it's interesting to see the different responses you get. The responses on Facebook like, hey, man, what's up? Sounds really good. You got to holler at me. I said to email me. Or the comments on the post like, yo, man, can you tell me more? What are the other details or this and that? Versus the artists that email are able to articulate themselves and say, like, this would be an incredible opportunity. I'm a serious artist. I know you're really busy. And so what I'm saying is those same skills that I used in the club when I was starting out, we're not using right now because of COVID, but they can be applied to that virtual space as well.
Well, I love how you did that. Basically, like, can you follow basic instructions? Because if they can't do that, that's pretty much, they're not going to be.
How are you going to make it on a plane? Like, like even like do I need to be vaccinated? Like,
yeah.
And you want to travel to Europe and you're asking that question? It's like,
yeah,
I can't help you, man. I just can't help you. And to me, I've always done those things because that's the gate. It's not being a gatekeeper, but you're just not ready yet. And and I always want to help the artists that are ready.
This is your show. You should feel absolutely no guilt about wanting to maintain a certain standard as it pertains to the opener, right? The other thing that I would say too, and you touched on it, is if you're gunning for an opening spot, don't just articulate what it means to you. Propose your value proposition, right? Like, hey, these are my streams. Look at, these cities in Europe are my biggest markets on Spotify.
1,000%.
I see you're touring here, here, and here. And like, if someone can actually do the homework and present a rock solid case, man, you stand out. Like, we get a lot of submissions just as a promoter, agent, manager for, we'll put Brett Kissel out on tour and people want to get on the front end. And I'm always stunned at how that's lost on people. It's like, okay, I get what it means for you to go out and play in front of 5,000 or 10,000 people, but what does it mean for Brett? What does it mean for me as a guy who might be promoting it and financially invested in it? Like, are you going to help sell tickets? How much are you going to do some media? Like, what will you bring to the table that will actually make this a reciprocal relationship?
For sure. And transferable skills too. Like one guy said to me, hey, D, I do videos. So like, if you bring me out, I'll shoot video. Like already you stood out from the pack. Or I do graphic design, so I can make up some flyers. I can do this. Or I'm really big on TikTok and maybe we can do some, like, it's all things you're saying, but it's not just the performance. It's what else can you bring to the table sometimes so that we can all win. Win.
Okay, I thought we had the perfect sentiment to wrap this up on before, but now we really do. So thank you. Thank you again. Appreciate you, brother.
Appreciate you.
Okay, have a good day.
1,000%.